Hello, 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 and I hope you are doing wonderfully well on this lovely day, night, whatever time of the day or night it is that you are viewing this presentation and participating in a discussion of the Bluest Eye. We're going to dive into the Bluest Eye, the first half of the novel, and then I'm going to share a couple things I want you to keep in mind uh, as you approach the reading and as you contemplate and think and make connections about everything happening. First and foremost, I hope you are thoroughly enjoying this novel. As I've mentioned more than once, Toni Morrison is my number one author who floats my boat, rocks my world, elevates my mind, enriches my spirit, and as much as I'm a Shakespearean and I love Shakespeare, I think Toni Morrison is even a better writer than William Shakespeare. That's how much I love and adore her. A couple of things. I think I've mentioned this, but it's worth mentioning again. Toni Morrison is often considered a magical realist writer. So she incorporates some magical elements and along with the realism. And in this book, it's not quite as profound as in something like Beloved, her novel Beloved, but particularly with the beginning and the end and some of the things we're going to discuss about narration and some of the framings of the proper story, you'll see some of that happening. So let's dive right in, shall we? So, there are a few different narrative devices that Morrison employs within the writing of this novel. And first, I want to talk about paratext. You'll see that it's a term coined by literary theorist Gerard Genet, who lived in 1930 to 2018. And a paratext refers to all the external elements that make up a published book, other than the main text, which is created by the author. For example, the cover art, the title page, and any external aspects of a book that help to provide helpful insights into a literary work. Although all of these other elements that I'm speaking of are not part of the actual text or the story, the paratext can have a significant influence over the way a text is received. So I want you to think about the simplicity of the cover. If you're using the original cover book with the silver cover and the Bluest Eye written in cursive in blue on the front. And then you'll want to look at the back and Toni Morrison's picture and the little synopsis of what they share about the story, and then the quotations. You'll also want to open up and see how it starts with a claim from Toni Morrison and then the Bluest Eye and all this sort of introductory information. The foreword gives you some really important ideas. And then even the Bluest Eye with a leaf there as the title page. Before we get to what is part of the frame of the story. And within this paratext, we also have this concept of Dick and Jane. If you're not familiar, here's a picture of Dick and Jane, a page from one of the children's books that was a basic reader, first published in 1930s, and there's a whole series of Dick and Jane books. And they were really popular and sort of the standard for readers. So you'll notice that it's two little white kids, Jane and Dick. Think about their names. And then you can see Jane said, run, 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 Dick, run and see. And I want you to come back to this because other than the sections of the novel being titled after autumn, winter, spring, summer, the chapter titles are a take on the Dick and Jane readers, and I'll come back to that a little bit later, but it's a run-on sentence and all the words are scrunched together with no spaces. And then I want you to keep that in mind about the title of every chapter, how it relates to the Dick and Jane stories, of what is considered the standard or what is considered the ideal family, a mother, a father, a girl, a boy, child. So it's very 1930s when the novel is set. It's very traditional Americana in that way. It's very white-centric. It's also very heterocentric. So we have a few different things that are happening where when we're thinking about things like people being othered or marginalized or not included, this is sort of who books were written for, and how society was sort of structured to sort of privilege some and marginalize or just ignore, and even worse, harm others, particularly people of color. So we'll be coming back to this over throughout the novel, so I want you to keep that in mind about paratext. The next thing is you're going to notice that we have a couple of narrators, and it can get a little confusing. And so the narration is going to shift between Claudia McTeer, who is a child herself, and we need to keep that in mind, who's a child herself who is trying to be, she tells Piccola's story from her own point of view. So Claudia tells Piccola's story from Claudia's point of view. It's really interesting that Piccola doesn't even get a voice throughout the novel when the story is hers. Even when it's not Claudia McTeer speaking, then it is a third person omniscient narrator that we aren't sure. Is it Piccola? Is it not Piccola? But most sort of say not. But when Claudia is telling the story, she's a child trying to sound like an adult, but I think it's important for us to remember that it's a childlike perspective. You might consider, why does Morrison decide to use that perspective to tell this story? You might want to think about the concept of innocence, loss of innocence, childlike wonder, curiosity, still kind of growing and maturing, and even cognitively and with thinking, and the brain is still being formed. So lots of interesting choices for this. Now you open up into two frames of the story, right? And with these two frames, you've got what's called a intradiegetic sort of narration style, and then you've got a extradiegetic narration style. And what this refers to is that we've got intradiegetic is what is known as the story, the world of the story. It's the world and the events that happen within the story. And then, so that would be when we have Claudia McTeer sort of narrating and letting us know what's happening from an insider's perspective. When we have the extradiegetic, the third person omniscient narrator, Then we've got the anything to do with the outside world. You might think about it like when you're watching a film and you have a voiceover or a superimposed caption. So we've got these frames. Oh, that's my dog. I'm recording. That's the dogs. Sorry, my husband just came home, so yay. So you've got these frames, and the frames are really fascinating because they pick up from this sort of idealistic or ideal white upper middle class family perspective. And this is that outer shell. And this is gonna get to something if with the first part of this. And I want you to think about the typography, even how it's written and how it starts with the spaces and then it gets, it's now written all with one word instead of any spaces between words. And so, and then that becomes the titles of each chapter, and see how this frame relates to the ending of the story as well. But it's also important to see how this first outer frame is very white centric, right? And how it also reflects what is considered to be the ideal family structure, and what that sort of looks like, and how that overarching whiteness, and as Toni Morrison certainly writes about, that white gaze, the power of the white gaze on people of color, and also the time period, right? Who has power, who has authority, who has privilege, who's entitled, all these sorts of things happening. And then in the second part, we get a really interesting thing happening in the second frame, and that's when we're going to go down here, where Morrison essentially eschews both suspense and linear chronology in this second of the preface, the second frame to the story, because she begins chronologically with the ending. She kind of, the narrator here reveals Pacola's rape, the death of her child, and the identity of her rapist right here for us. And this is an unusual strategy where she places all of the novel's major sources of conflict here at the beginning. This is very different from traditional Western novel format that follows a common story arc with the expedition, the rising action, the climax, the denouement, and the conclusion. And she's and usually builds up to the tension to get to that climax, and then revealing things at the end. But she does so now. And I wonder what that does for you as a reader, especially when we are dealing with such heavy topics as rape and incest and child abuse, and if it catches you off guard, if it works for you. Now, many of us are really, this is more of a commonplace sort of way of storytelling in today's modern ages, or contemporary time, because we have Quentin Tarantino, we have many television shows, we have a number of films that are kind of starting at the end and then they go backward, right? But I want us to remember when this book was published in 1970, this is something new that Morrison is doing. I also want to highlight something. There's irony in the family name Breedlove. And think about that. Breeding love. And do the Breedloves breed love? And there are 3 or 4 types of love that are described throughout the story of this novel. We've got familial love, family. There's a lot of focus on maternal love, lots of mothers in this story. We've got friendship love. We've also got sibling under familial, that would be parental, sibling. And then we've got sexual love as well. And so I want you to sort of look at and think about this concept of the breedloves and the irony when it comes to the family name, and how they reflect maybe the types of love or the negation of the expression of that love. In fact, is there almost a lack of love in this novel, even self-loathing or self-hatred? Is there more distrust in relationships rather than trust and safety and love? Do we have a delusional perspective, dissatisfied, particularly with the character of Polly? What about friendship? And does Piccola find friendship with Claudia and Freda? And also with the family? And does Charlie believe that he is showing his daughter love? Is there a lack of family love? A distorted view of family love? And so it's interesting to see how a lot of the themes and ideas of the novel are already introduced in these first 2 frames of the story. Okay, I have a couple of questions here that I also want you to think about. And one other thing I want you to keep in mind as you're reading the novel is Morrison describes characters who are flawed, certainly, and who are suffer trauma and have a trauma response as a result. And in so doing, she shows this she challenges this concept of morality, of ethics. Who's held to who chooses what morality is, what ethics are? She also moral ambiguity, but she also shows people behaving poorly, monstrously. But does she ever, as an author, judge these people? Does she leave it to the reader? And why would she or would she not judge? Does she blame people? She certainly, in her storytelling, explains how people come to do what they do, what informs how they think, how they feel, how they behave, essentially trauma-informed behaviors. She describes the traumas, but does she ever offer exactly what the causes are, or offer any blame for anyone? So I really want you to think about this as you read and as you determine if you think there are monsters, or this concept of good people and bad people and what that looks like. So I want you to notice in the first chapter, it's just called Autumn, and then it goes right into the story. But it's not just the chapter, but it's also the section, because there's our chapters within the section. And so why do you think she chooses the seasons to guide us through this story. We want to think about the seasons and the symbolism of the seasons and how often the seasons parallel the life cycle of humans. So we've got spring, which is birth and rebirth. We've got summer, which is youth and vitality and vibrance. And then we've got autumn, which is fall, which is usually coming into a person's twilight of their life, their middle to older age, and then winter is older age and to death. Now, it's interesting that she chooses autumn to begin the story. So I want you to think about, as you're reading the chapters within the autumn section, how does that relate? How is she changing our perspective of this? I also want you to look at and think about, in the opening here, about the marigolds, the symbolism, and how the foreshadowing related to the marigolds, and what happens toward the end of the story with the marigolds and the seed planting. Piccola's father had dropped his seeds in his own plot of black dirt. But before that, the sisters, there were no marigolds in the fall of 1941. So it's the novel's in the 40s, right? But some of the references are from the 30s. And then this planting of marigolds. And then think about the plants, the nature. Think about what marigolds represent themselves, the symbolism, and think about how they might relate to the children and that seed and growth and growing and parents nurturing their own gardens or not, and what sorts of humans grow in those familial gardens. So lots of beautiful things that Morrison's doing with this that I want you to think about. Also think about what in this first formal chapter foreshadows the rest of the novel. We've got some race issues that open up the novel. Beauty standards with Shirley Temple, who was this is a picture of Shirley Temple here, American actress and internationally popular child star of the 30s. And then I want you to compare and contrast the parents. We've got these two sets of parents with these different daughters, and throughout the novel, we certainly have Morrison setting up the Breedloves and the McTeers as parents that are almost foils for one another, right? So now we go to the next chapter. Here is the house. It is green and white. It has a red door. It is very pretty. It is very pretty. It is very pretty, right? So here I want you to consider, where do the Breedloves live and why Morrison might have chosen that particular locale. In what way might the Breedloves' home represent them as a family? What is revealed about the Breedloves' socioeconomic standing, and how might that influence how they work as a family, how they behave as individuals, how they behave as a unit? And how might the home be a place of humiliation rather than a place of safety or sanctity? The reason I chose this picture is because this is a coal-burning stove, and it becomes sort of central to some things happening here. And so I want you to keep that in mind as you move forward. Now here's the next chapter. Here is the family, mother, father, Dick and Jane. They live in the green and white house. They are every house, right? So I want you, these titles, it's why are they connected? Why is it a run-on? Like, why are the words run together like this? And how does this idealized version of a white family that's considered to be the paramount, the ultimate goal, how does that frame, that paratext, weigh in on the action of this story with the Pecola and the Breedloves and others. I'm not going to read you all these questions. I think you have other questions on Canvas and questions from class and discussions, but I also wanted to pose a few more specific questions to get you to really dive into this chapter and make connections between characters and between between characters and between themes and ideas and symbols throughout the story. So now when we go to winter, the first chapter in winter that is similar like autumn and doesn't have another title, I want you to consider the concept of scapegoating and why you think Pecola is picked on in this chapter specifically. Does Pecola become a scapegoat for everyone in this novel in some way, shape, or form? And is she the being, or does she become the receptacle, or the where they unload all their pain, all their suffering, all their insecurity? And why might she be the one who everyone dumps on, right? The next question is dealing with a white girl named Maureen who seems to care for Pecola at first. And I want you to consider in what way might Maureen be seen as having a white savior complex. This is also termed white saviors, and a white savior complex, although it might seem like something positive, it actually is something detrimental, because it's when, whether or not they know, or it's conscious or subconscious, white people, the underlying belief is that they are better or have more skills or knowledge or understanding, and can swoop in and save Black, Indigenous, or other people of color, individuals. So it's sort of it is very closely linked to racism and other elements of hierarchy when it comes to race and identity. I think it's important to consider who benefits from privilege and who behaves with entitlement in this chapter, and how that is related to race, also to socioeconomic standing, and other elements as well. And why, in what way does the action in the chapter align with the winter season? Now we have, see the cat, it goes meow, meow, come play with Jane. The kitten will not play. Here, we're introduced into another parent, a mother, Geraldine. And I have a number of questions here. Again, I'm not really gonna read these out for you. The scapegoat idea continues here. There's some irony in the fact that Pecola again gets blamed, even though she's the one trying to protect the kitten. And why might Geraldine unload on her and the other children in the way she does, rather than directing that angst toward the perpetrator of the violence? And I'm really interested in learning what you think about, can children be monsters, behave monstrously? Again, and that concept of Morrison shows people behaving badly, behaving poorly, behaving even, some could say, monstrously. But does she blame them? Does she lead us to see why they might behave that way. But does she say whether or not they're good or bad, right or wrong? Does Marston show us the complexity of the human condition, the complexity of humanity, rather than simply saying this binary good or bad? Does she show that there's crossover? Can good people behave monstrously? Can bad people behave good? Whatever we're defining that as. But also, who chooses what's good and bad? Who has what a society deems to be good and bad thrust upon them? Do they get a choice in what that looks like, or what that is? So, and can we hold, even though it might seem paradoxical, can we still hold people accountable for their monstrous behavior, for their poor behavior, but can we also understand why they might behave that way? The trauma or the influences or the circumstance that informed their own human growth and might encourage them to behave one way or another. Okay, I know that was a little bit long. I hope it is useful for you. I can't wait to hear your thoughts on this first half of the novel. And to be sure, this will be continued. Part 2 is coming soon. So please keep reading, keep thinking, and keep sharing your thoughts. Have a good day. Bye.